So you have 5 distinct voices. What we talk about is you actually use all 5 of the voices, but just some of these voices you tend to use more often than others. It's how do the people that interact with you view you as? We want to develop leaders who people want to follow, not who they have to follow. And you have to be willing to look at who you are as a person and as a leader to really be able to grow and develop yourself into that leader, like we said, that people want to follow. We need to have all 5 voices represented because they all bring different things to the table.
You're listening to the Credit Union Leadership Podcast, a podcast that delivers value and offers up insight that'll help your credit union grow. ServiStar has been consulting with credit unions for over 20 years, growing them in the areas of cultural development, leadership development, and management training. To learn more about what ServiStar can do for you or your credit union, check them out at ServiStarConsulting.com.
Welcome to the Credit Union Leadership Podcast. I'm Scott Anderley, and today we don't have Albrecht, but we've got Peter Tyson, who helps us out at ServiStar by teaching one of our newer but very important classes, Target Leadership. Peter, welcome to the Credit Union Leadership Podcast.
Hey, thanks for having me.
No, this is going to be a good time. And some of you that have been listening to the podcast, you might remember last year, Peter was on here with our CEO, Taylor, talking about the importance of the class. And you know what, if we could touch on that really quick, because you've taught 2 versions, or I guess 2 cohorts of this. How has that gone? What impact have you seen on the leaders you've been working with?
Well, it's been great. We've had 2, like you said. We started one in the spring of last year, and then we just wrapped up our second cohort here in the late fall, early winter.
Yeah,
it's been a great experience. I think both cohorts had some really valuable things that we pulled out of it and the members pulled out of it as well. But the second cohort, I think we really focused more on individual meetings where we spent time talking to them on a one-on-one basis. And I think that was extraordinarily powerful. And I'm really excited to continue that aspect of the course because I think that's where we made the most progress and we're able to sit down, talk to these people one-on-one, and really get into some of the issues that they themselves wanted to talk about. Not just general topics, but really got into things that impacted them on a daily basis. So really excited about the 2 sessions we've run and the sessions we're going to run next year.
Yeah. Oh, and I love what you said is it's almost like personalized coaching or consulting. Now you're working one-on-one with the challenges or the goals they had set for themselves. I know for one of my friends who attended, this has been huge. She actually transitioned from credit unions to move up to a VP of member experience role. And you got to play a huge part in that. And also a big thing for her was the GiANT leadership voices, which is really what I wanted to bring you on today. But I'll get too excited. Before we go into that, Peter, I want you to quickly tell us a little bit about your background and how you got connected with ServiStar. You're on the board of directors at a credit union, right?
I've been on the board of directors of Team One Credit Union for the last, 13, 14 years now.
Okay.
We're based up in Saginaw, Michigan. And so the way I got hooked up with you guys was obviously as a part owner of this QSO of ServiStar. I got a chance to interact on several occasions with Taylor. And we started to talk about, hey, how could I help with some of my experiences and use that in the credit union space to help other credit unions move forward. So, but my other career, I was a teacher for 25 years. I ran a union for 25 years. So I've got a lot of experience in leading people, both through good situations and bad situations and dealing with all kinds of different people on all kinds of different levels. So I felt this was a really good match for me with the leadership experience I've had, my experience in the credit union space, and we thought it'd be a good space for me to get into to help move people forward and move that credit union movement forward. So really excited to be here.
Yeah. And what's great about that, I'm hearing you really have the heart of a teacher because you have been a teacher, you have been a leader, and now you're teaching your leadership skills one-on-one and in class settings. And you've been helping ServiStar do something we haven't done before, but that we've seen as a huge need, which is we're preparing individual contributors, we're preparing middle managers. But now, as Taylor said many times, is we're in a pivotal moment in the credit, well, really in all industries, but in the credit union industry specifically, we're seeing so many CEO, C-suite level leaders retire, but there's no succession plan. There's no one ready to take. And that's where you've come on and you're helping us build those future leaders. And something that you really brought in that's been huge for us is the understanding of the there are 5, but the GiANT leadership voices. And as we talk about this is huge. We bring it into Target Leadership, but we've also brought it into our Emerging Leaders program. And then we've also brought it for everyone in our emotional intelligence. We bring this in and we talk about how to apply this. And I really want our listeners to hear All right, emotional intelligence, leadership voices. What is this? Why is this important? At credit union, I should just learn how to keep my jaw in balance. I should just learn how to do the marketing and just do the specific tasks. Why do I need to take this? And that would be my first question for you is when we talk about giant voices, could you first give us a brief overview of what are the giant voices?
Yeah, so there's lots of different personality tests and assessments that you can take out there in the world.
Mhm.
I think the giant one does a really good job of just simplifying those and laying them out into what you said are the five voices. So you have five distinct voices. Now, the beautiful thing about what we do when we're talking about giant is we say, okay, maybe you test as a nurturer, which is what I test as, right? But it doesn't mean that's the only voice I use. What we talk about is you actually use all five of the voices, but just some of these voices you tend to use more often than others. And so, what the benefit of the giant five voices is, it really shows who you are and how you interact with others, how others view you as a leader. Because what we talk about a lot in the program, it's not so much how good of a leader you think you are, right? That's kind of irrelevant to what we're doing. It's
Yeah.
how do the people that interact with you view you as? And Giant really helps you focus in on how others are viewing you by seeing what some of your traits are, right? Both good and bad. And then we
Yeah.
give you things to work on going forward. So your interactions with people become hopefully a lot more positive. And we talk about this concept of you want to turn negative consequences into positive consequences with people, which
Mhm.
will help you become a better leader and make people want to follow you. Our philosophy is we want to develop, like you talked about, we have a real point of concern in the credit union space that we're losing a lot of high level executives and a lot of high level CEOs over the next couple of years.
Yeah.
And so what we want to do is we want to develop the next generation of leaders. But our saying is we want to develop leaders who people want to follow, not who they have to follow. And I think Giant does a really good job of helping us as individuals look at who we are so we can become that leader that people want to follow and not a leader that people have to follow. Because we've all followed leaders that we've had to follow, right? And
Yeah. Yeah. We
those
could
don't
share a
turn
bunch of
out very
stories on
well.
that.
Yeah, they don't turn out very well, right? But the leaders that you really get excited about and you're passionate about who they are, that is
Mhm.
when you become a better person, become a better leader. But it's also when the credit union can go to places maybe they haven't been to in the past. And that's what we want to do with target leadership going forward.
Man, so one of the big things I'm hearing you talk about right here, Peter, is the idea of perception or self-awareness of how others are viewing you. And it's dead on, especially for me and when I'm thinking about how to apply this on our ServiStar team. But even taking this, I'm learning when I'm meeting people just for 3 or 4 hours doing a training, you can get an idea of which of these voices are their most prominent or dominant voice as you're talking to them. And it helps me connect with them and learn how do I teach in a way that they'll engage and view this as a positive interaction. So what I'm hearing you say is self-perception is or self-awareness is a big key into being a leader that people want to follow, not have to follow. And actually what I'm hearing when you talked about we've all worked for leaders that we've had to follow, taking this course can help you understand maybe the good intentions that those leaders had that we just weren't able to see at the time. So we've talked about this a little bit, but I want to dive into this more of why is this? Well, actually, wait, before I go to why, I want to reiterate something else I heard. You quickly mentioned that this is an assessment. This is something to understand ourselves. So it's similar to a DISC assessment, Myers-Briggs, Enneagram, True Colors. But what makes this different that you talked about is really how people perceive you. And this leads me to the next question. So, all right, this is a type of assessment. And what I encourage is the more assessments you take, the better you get a better understanding of yourself, better conversations. But why does giant stick out? And I want to say something that I've noticed teaching this that's been huge is this idea of when you understand your voice, which there's the five. You talked about you're a nurturer, is your prominent. My prominent is the creative. There's also the pioneer, which is we get things done. What's the mission? You've got the guardian, which is their champion of due diligence. Do we look at the plan? What are we doing? Are we honoring the legacy? And then I'm forgetting the fifth one. Remind me of the fifth one real quick.
Connector. I think you missed
Oh
the
yeah.
connector. Yep.
Oh yeah. And Albrecht, he's a connector. If y'all have ever met Scott Albrecht in a training, all about bringing people together, knowing somebody, having a good time. So with understanding this, the thing that I've found to be a huge value in training, and even for myself, is really understanding this idea of triggers and our default mechanism, our default responses. And could you speak a little more into that and why that would be an important knowledge to have in becoming a leader?
Yeah, that's a great question, Scott. And that's something that we do spend a good amount of time talking about in the class because what each voice has is they have a trigger, right? Or actually, not just one, they have a whole bunch of things that can trigger them. And we need to understand what that trigger means. What sets us off? What can sometimes get us going on the wrong
Mm-hmm.
side? So, triggers do have a negative connotation, and they're supposed to have a negative connotation, right? So, as a nurturer, what makes me mad, right? Or as a guardian, what makes me mad? What can get me into what I was just talking about, into some of those negative consequences when I start to do some things that aren't productive to me or to my organization or to my team. And so when you understand what those triggers are, sometimes you can now see them coming and hopefully try to stop them or
Mm-hmm.
minimize them. You may not be able to stop them completely. We're never going to say you're going to be the perfect leader after taking target leadership. It's not
Yeah.
possible to always be perfect. But what we always talk about is how can you improve going forward and understanding what your triggers are, what might set you off to get into that negative consequences. How can we understand what those are? And then take that information to try and minimize those as they start to come up. And that will lead us then to what we said, like those better positive consequences when you have better interactions with people going forward. And just understand sometimes how those voices interact. And
Mm-hmm.
sometimes how like guardians can sometimes trigger pioneers, and if you understand who you are, you can understand that I may not always get along with each one of these voices, and that's okay.
Mm-hmm.
I understand those triggers. I can now see those ahead of time and say, okay, I got to think about this. How can I make sure I don't do that same reaction that I have been doing over time? And because that hurts me as a leader, it starts to undermine as we talk about your trust and your influence with people. And so if you can understand those triggers, and triggers then lead to what we call defense mechanisms, really where it starts to get interesting, where you start to see these triggers now are going to force me to do this. I don't want to do that.
Mm-hmm.
Well, how can, once you understand that, how can you use that information now to make, again, yourself a better leader and your organization better? But also, it's that self-reflection too, right? You may not even realize you're doing these things. You might not
Yeah.
think they're bad, but the people on the other side of you are the ones that are seeing these triggers and defense mechanisms, and they're feeling the brunt of that then. And that's where you start to undermine that trust and influence. And so what we talk about is, again, we say, hey, we actually have a little model we put up called the leadership mirror. And you have to be willing to look at who you are as a person and as a leader to really be able to grow and develop yourself into that leader, like we said, that people want to follow.
Mm. Great stuff. We're going to take a quick break to hear a word from our sponsors. When we come back, I want us to, you're going to hear some stories of what does these triggers in our default reactions, our preferred response look like in action. So quick word from our sponsors. ServiStar's target leadership. Credit unions executives, we cannot afford to have breakdowns in key leadership areas. If you have breakdowns in communication, what's that going to create? Unnecessary conflict, drama, and just dropping the ball. If we have breakdowns in relationship, what does this create? Mistrust, toxic environments. If there's breakdowns in alignment, we're wasting effort. We're losing time. There's division. Breakdowns in execution. Oh my gosh, we're talking about unmet goals, missed deadlines, blown budgets, and damaged credibility. These are the things you don't want. What you need to do is gain insights into your strengths and weaknesses by diagnosing each of these leadership areas and pinpointing opportunities for improvement. And guess what? ServiStar Consulting and GiANT Worldwide are joining forces to nurture credit union leaders who can inspire. We've got a certified coach, Peter Tyson, who is going to test these out and work on these skills to help you develop your talent, your alignment, your reflection, your growth, your engagement, and tailored coaching sessions, one-on-one coaching sessions where you get to reflect what you've learned on during these courses. This is a great thing. If you've taken Emerging Leaders and Vertex, this is the next step in your leadership journey. This is meant for managers, directives, and executive leaders. It's also meant for people that want to become executive leaders. So don't wait. Sign up today. The link is in the show notes. And welcome back to the Credit Union Leadership Podcast. When we left off, it was kind of on a cliffhanger talking about this idea of triggers and our default responses and what we need to do to be better and really doing you called it leadership mirror. Is that right, Peter?
Yeah, it's a figurative thing, right? But you
Yeah.
look in that mirror to kind of get, because what we're talking about is you got to understand who you are before you can really start to grow as a leader. Yep.
And how people perceive you. And this was
Correct.
something that I thought rocked my world, rocked a lot of people's world. Because what's so good about things like the DISC assessment and the Myers-Briggs is you understand, oh, this is how I'm the life of the party, or this is just how I act and how I talk. But what's really good about this section is this helps me understand, oh, this is how I work in a group project. This is how I work in a meeting. Or, oh, if I'm silent in a meeting and I don't know why, or I'm irritated, I can start looking inwardly and thinking, what's my most prominent voice, or what voice is speaking right now? What's this upsetting? And this really gives me definition, and there's power in definition. Actually, I think about, like I said, we bring this in a lot of our courses. Emotional intelligence is one of them. I had a marketing director, and her primary voice was a creative. Get it? Marketing, creative. It's a pretty good fit. Her second one, I think, was connector. And something I think you briefly touched on, Peter, is sometimes with our voices. Actually, before I keep telling this story, could you tell me the 5 different levels? Like, all right, if I'm a connector, there's the primary voice, the secondary voice, but then there's something called the blind spot and nemesis spot. And these are talking about, we all have a little bit of each voice, but where each voice fits is pretty foundational in how we communicate to one another.
It is. So let's start with that nemesis voice because that's the one that I think people get the most out of, right? So these are voices, and we got a whole chart we could show you, but I don't think we can show that right now.
Yeah.
Voices interact well with each other and what voices don't interact very well with each other. So for example, like a guardian does not interact very well with a pioneer. Okay. So they would be somewhat of a nemesis voice. And what that means is the guardian by nature is always going to be very much that rules follower by the book. And they're going to be, just focused on the procedures, processes. They're very good at doing that. A
Hmm.
pioneer is always going to be kind of this creative forward thinker, wants to push people past that limit, really wants to go to that summit, as we say, and get to that summit as quickly as we possibly can.
Yeah.
Those voices can butt heads a lot, right? And when you start to explain that to people and they start to take this assessment, they can see that, oh, well, I'm a guardian and my boss is a pioneer. And maybe that's why we butt heads from time to time, because that's just who I am as a person. And once you understand that, that helps you to have more positive interactions with those two voices, right? You realize
Yeah.
Guardian is not trying to come after the Pioneer. The Pioneer is not trying to, as we say, bulldoze that Guardian. What they're doing
And
is,
let me stop you right there,
yeah,
because this actually goes beautifully into the story. So, after the end of our class, I had this lady stay with us, and she was saying, so the person I report to is a pioneer. And one of the things about the pioneers, they're focused on the mission. They're focused on how do we get there? We've got to get there, and leading people. They can be very charismatic people as well, but sometimes they're too driven on results. And as I was talking to this not connector, sorry, creative who's in marketing, she was telling me also that recently she found out that she was neurodivergent and it's hard for her to focus. And the deadline for projects, her supervisor as a pioneer was very, very, how would I say this?
precise, maybe.
Yeah, very precise. And also the deadline she felt like were too soon. Like it was too hard for her to get in the creative flow to develop a process, because as a creative, one of the strengths, but could also be a weakness, is there's this like perfectionism. I've got to build the system. It's got to look good. Where a pioneer might say, it doesn't have to be the best, but it needs to move us forward. And the pioneer's
Right,
like, hey, this needs to be due next week. And she goes, I need a few more weeks to work on this.
right.
And so we had to talk about this. And this was a big moment for her to understand, oh, okay, now I'm understanding the things that trigger me are when I feel like it can't be perfect, but I've got to understand who I'm working for. They might
Mhm.
not care about it perfect as much. They might be more focused on the idea of their masters of the second idea. So I just need to bring in something. So yes, they were, I think what you said, the nemesis voice, there's a lot of conflict there, and we've got to know that. But there's value in working with someone with your nemesis voice. Can you speak to that a little more, Peter?
Yeah, because the nemesis voice in theory is going to bring out things that maybe you're not comfortable with, right? And
Mm-hmm.
so having a leader that's going to kind of push you a little bit isn't bad. We're not saying that's bad at all. I mean, it's actually really good. But how do you push them in the right way so you don't trigger them, right? Then they'll get into their defense mechanisms, then they start acting out, then you start to have conflicts. That's what we want to avoid.
Yeah.
So all voices are important, and we need all different voices in the workplace, especially in credit union space. We need to have all 5 voices represented because they all bring different things to the table.
Mm-hmm.
And so you're absolutely right. A pioneer might push a creative, or a pioneer might push a guardian, and that's okay because sometimes the guardian creative needs to be pushed a little bit to get them out of that comfort zone. You hit, I think, the nail on the head where you're saying the creative is very much that perfectionist oriented person, which is exactly true.
Yeah.
They can't really celebrate anything until it's 100% done.
Oh, all right. So tell me if this has happened for you.
Yeah.
When we take the assessments in emerging leaders or emotional intelligence, a lot of them go, I could see myself being a creative, but I'm not a perfectionist. And I thought, well, wouldn't a perfectionist say they're not a perfectionist? I think that's pretty funny. Is that something you hear a lot from
Yeah,
creatives?
you do get that. And that's a great point. And my answer always is, well, look, the test isn't 100% correct, right? Doesn't mean if you test as a creative, that's all you do. Remember, you have access
Hmm.
to all five of the voices. So there might even be, which Shine doesn't really have, right, a scale of creative. So maybe you're very much on the creative side. Maybe you're kind of just in that creative side. So not all the traits or all the personalities are going to apply perfectly to every voice. And that's the
Yeah.
fascinating thing about it, to understand that what is my secondary voice? What's my third? What's my fourth? And what's my fifth? So,
Hmm.
you may have, you might be a nurturer like I am, but you maybe creative is your second voice. So maybe you do have some of those perfectionist, tendencies, even though you're not testing as a creative. So it's
Yeah.
good for us just to take that look as to who we are. Just gives us kind of a baseline for who you are as a person. And about 90 to 95% of the people, when they take the assessment, they say, yeah, that's me. A lot of those tendencies are me. But again, not all of them, as I tell them, are going to apply to you precisely, right? You're going to have different aspects from different voices that come in because you do have all five voices that you use. Some you just use much more frequently than others.
Yeah.
Uh, so
And
I,
going back to the idea we talked about at the beginning of perception, how this helps out with perception. With the marketing person I was working with, this helped us understand how is she being perceived by her supervisor, how is she being perceived by her team when she's saying we need more time, and it's oh okay, well now I'm understanding. All right, there he might be perceiving me as I'm pulling us back and taking us away from progress, and now I'm able to understand that better so I can work with my team. But also what I would say is this is great perception of if you are that pioneer or if you are that guardian and you're pushing the hey, have we really thought this through? Hey, are we making progress? You can understand what you're doing
yep,
and
yeah,
say, hey, we're pushing forward because we need to, or hey, we're doing the due
yeah.
diligence because we got to make sure we're protecting our members' money. But it also helps you catch your team doing it right, saying, hey, I know that this is a little uncomfortable for you, but
It does.
what you're doing is making a huge impact on our membership as well.
And Scott, what we talk about as well, too, when you break these five voices down, right? You have your guardians and your nurture, and we call those your present oriented voices. So what that means is those two voices are a little more resistant to change. Doesn't mean they don't want to change, but they're a little slower to make change. Your creatives, your connectors, and your pioneers are what we call future oriented voices, which means they're very
Mm.
change oriented, maybe is the best way to phrase it, right? They're willing
Yeah.
to change. They want to change. But the fascinating thing about it is when you look at the data, nurturers and guardians make up almost 73% of the population.
Yeah.
And the other voices are only about, what was that, 27% or so of the
Yeah.
population. So what we try and talk about, especially if you're one of those future-oriented voices, is realize you're working probably with a lot of people that we would consider present-oriented voices that are going to be resistant to change. And so,
Mhm.
how do you, once you understand who you are, what we talk about is how can you build some bridges then with those people who don't want to change to get them to accept that change faster, right? Uh,
Yeah.
because they just, not that they don't want to, they just like the way things are and they don't want to change. We've all seen that in our
Hmm.
workplaces. Changes that people are always resistant to change. And what we have found is that a lot of people, once they start to hear that, understand that okay, they're resistant to change, but I got to find some ways to help them accept that change, and they'll be much more willing to kind of come across that bridge to whatever it is you want to do. But I'm going to stop there because I don't like the way I explain that. Can I stop that for
Yeah.
just
Yeah.
a second?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Go keep talking about. Let's go.
So as you talk about these present and future oriented voices, the point that we're trying to get at is you have to help them to accept change. Once people get to the other side of change, most of the time, Scott, they
Yeah.
like it, right? They want to be there. They realize it was a good thing. But getting
Hmm.
through that initial change can be very difficult. And the five voices really helps you to understand that's just who they are as a person. And now you got to find some ways to reach out to them, make sure that change comes a little more effectively for your organization.
There's that ambiguity, and because I don't know what the future looks like,
Mhm.
I would rather stay here. It makes me think of one of the favorite people I love to read about, Walt Disney. And Walt Disney was really, really good about being futuristic, but painting that picture very vividly so everyone understood this is what it's going to look like. And I want to be a part of that. And I think that's part of being a leader. You talk about building that bridge is how can I make this as clear as possible that they can see the vision. George Lucas also did it really well with Industrial Light and Magic of they did things that were impossible that people never thought they could do with movies, but he was able to paint the picture and say, imagine what this would look like. And imagine it would be, and then people go, oh, okay. And then you're getting the Guardians think about, all right, how do we really do this? Let's do our due diligence instead of saying that's impossible. He was able, because he cast a vision, had this picture, had this story, had this actual vision that people could see, not just some abstract, ambiguous thing.
And it's important though. I want to come back because it is important for the guardians and the nurturers to make sure we're doing that change
Yeah.
in the right and appropriate way. So that's what their role is. And once you
Mm-hmm.
understand that, you realize that maybe they aren't as resistant. They just got to make sure everything is going the way it's supposed to be going, especially in the financial sector, right? I mean, you have all your regulations, all your things you have to follow to make sure when you implement something that it's all in the right place at the right time. And so just again, understanding that some people, 75% or so of the population is going to be resistant to change. And you, if you're one of those future-oriented voices, you got to come up with some ways to effectively present that change to get these folks to come along faster.
Yeah. So two more questions as we wrap this up. One question, Peter, is you've been teaching on the GiANT Leadership Voices. I think you're certified as a GiANT Leadership Voices coach, right?
Yep. Yep. Absolutely.
So with that, what breakthrough stories do you have of working with a client, working with a credit union leader that they realized something big that changed how they lead or how they were perceived?
Well, there's lots of stories. And I thought, again, when you get time to meet with people, I love to meet with them one-on-one, right? The group setting, you can talk about all this stuff and you'll have some people that participate, others that don't.
Mm-hmm.
Well, the one-on-one session is really where you start to have those breakthroughs. And I think some of the big breakthroughs we had, maybe in some of the last sessions we were running were, okay, we had a pioneer. We knew who a pioneer was, right? And what a pioneer has a tendency to do sometimes is to, like we used the term bulldozer earlier in our podcast. They like to
Yeah.
bulldoze people over. And so we actually have a picture of a bulldozer when we're talking about a pioneer, just to get you a frame of reference as to who they are as a person. Now, doesn't mean everyone that's a pioneer is a bulldozer. It just means that's
Yeah.
kind of the tendency of that voice. And so what that voice does is it tends to dominate conversations. So if you're a CEO, for example, and we've had some of these people that are pioneers, doesn't mean you all CEOs are pioneers, not at all what we're talking about, right? We
Mm-hmm.
had some pioneers who were CEOs. And I think what they started to realize as they were taking this class was that maybe I am a little bit of that bulldozer, right? Maybe I just push my ideas down and I don't allow other people to get their ideas to come up. And that's what a pioneer can tend to do. What we talk about is we got about 82% of our population, right, at work feels like they're misunderstood and undervalued. And part of that is because they don't have their voice heard, right? They don't ever get a chance to really effectively get their thoughts out there. And if you're a pioneer at that top and you're just telling people what they're going to do and not getting any feedback from them, that is where you start to run into problems as a leader, right? That's not a leader that we want to follow. That's a leader you have to follow. So the
Mm-hmm.
CEO now is really making a concerted effort to make sure at their senior management meetings that they are allowing their staff to speak up before this individual speaks up. And what we always
Nice.
talk about with the pioneers, they should speak last, not first. Because as you get into these voices, you realize if I'm a nurturer and I don't speak first, I'm going to hear other ideas and I may never get my idea out there because I don't think it's good now. So what this CEO is really making a very concerted effort doing, and I had some meetings with some of their other people in their organization, and they all confirmed it. This individual is waiting to go last, right? He wants to hear other people's ideas before he speaks. And I think that will really help to take that credit union to places they haven't been before. You're going to get all kinds of new ideas. And as we all know, sometimes when the top down decision making is not effective decision making, right? You got to
Mm-hmm.
get people to buy into those decisions and help you get to the right spot. So I hope that helps. But yeah, I mean, there's lots of
Yeah.
good stories we could talk about.
Man, oh, it also reminds me of another thing. As we were developing our emotional intelligence course and we were bringing in the GiANT Leadership Voices for the self-awareness part, what we realized was oh, we need to structure how we do our discussions in our breakout rooms. So we intentionally try to put our breakout rooms where we have one of each voice or a variety of voices, and we give them a list of who needs to speak first. Because what your giant leadership voice, has kind of a volume level of how much people speak out in meetings. And what you learn is, like you said, the nurturer tends to be the quietest because they want to make sure other people feel valued and heard, that they don't speak up that much. So
Yeah.
what we say is the nurturer needs to be the first one to speak up. And we have a whole list, but then the last one is the pioneer, because the pioneer is going to speak up if no one even tells them to speak up.
Right.
So it's fun to see people like come out of those breakout groups and go, whoa, everyone's talking now. And it's
Yeah.
because we follow that system. That's a practical way we use it. Last question I wanted to discuss with you, Peter. Something I've noticed talking to clients that want to send their people through emotional intelligence, talking with people and emerging leaders or that have tended target leadership, is some people say, well, I don't want to be a leader, or
Right.
I am not a leader, so I shouldn't take this assessment yet. My question for you is, how can understanding the five giant voices help, yes, help current leaders, but how can it help aspiring leaders, people that want to be in leadership one day? And how can it just help people that just want to be a part of the team?
Well, I think it's a no-brainer if you want to be a leader, right? I mean,
Yeah.
a great program, I mean, Giant just does a great job, I think, of simplifying these leadership voices, putting them out in a way that's easy to understand. It's not complicated. And so I think if you want to truly become that great leader, this is a great class for you to take. And if you look at some of the feedback, talk to people who have been in the class, I think you'll hear that from them, that they learn a lot about themselves, which
Mm-hmm.
is very important, but they also learn how they interacted with people. And maybe they didn't even realize how they're interacting with people until they started to take a hard look at some of these things that this assessment will share with you. So I think it's great for inspiration or for aspiring leaders, people that have that aspiration to be that leader in the credit union space. We need them. We need them to be good leaders. We want them to be leaders that people want to follow. But in order to do that, you got to be willing to look at yourself. And that's the hard part for some people to do, right? Take that
Mm-hmm.
look inside as to who I am, that self-reflection, self-awareness. Who am I right now? And how can I make some changes? And those sometimes are hard conversations because you may have to talk to people that you work with about, are you noticing any of these things in me that we're talking about in class? And they may say
Mm.
yes, they may say no. And those are hard conversations for those people to have, but they're extraordinarily valuable because once you understand how people perceive you, you can really use that information to develop yourself and be that leader that people want to follow. And I think that's so important for
Yeah.
people that want to be that leader. Now, the second part was people that maybe don't want to get into leadership. Is that what you were talking about?
Yeah, yeah. What happens if it's, hey, I'm just part of the team. I'm good with where I'm at. I don't need to take this.
Yeah, I think it's good for anyone. And we've talked about, if you haven't noticed in this podcast, we haven't always talked about necessarily everyone becoming a leader, but what we've talked about is how you interact with people, right? So it's such an
Yeah.
important tool to understand how you interact with your team. If you don't want to be a leader, that's fine, but I hope you want to be successful in your job and help to take your department or your team to that next level. In order to do that, you again still have to understand who you are, understand
Yeah.
how do you interact with people. So it's the same kind of premise. If you want to be a leader, you got to understand who you are. But to be really good at your job, if that's your goal, you have to understand who you are as well. And so I think it's valuable for anybody that wants to be the leader or is just kind of happy where they are. I think you're going to learn a lot in this program. I think you can take a lot out of it and take it back to your credit union and really help to take you, your department, and your credit union to levels you haven't seen before.
That's a great point. So it's for people that want to be leaders that people want to follow. It's also great for teammates
Yeah.
that want to be worked with. Like if
Yeah.
I want
Yeah.
people to enjoy working with me, or I want leaders to enjoy working with me, taking this and understanding how to work with relationships and the relational dynamic of this is really, really good. Well, Peter, before I let you go, what closing thoughts do you have to say on leadership, the giant voices, the credit union movement? What do you got?
Well, I'm just excited to be part of this movement now. It's really, I've been on that board of directors for 13 years, 14 years now. I've
Yeah.
enjoyed that aspect, but I was kind of limited as to what I could do. I could help that one credit union. So now I'm excited just to take some of this experience I've had and apply it to other credit unions around the country. I'm just such a strong believer in the credit union movement, right? It's such a good movement. We have such a good product and such a good industry. And we just need to make sure our industry is set for years and years to come. And I hope as people start to take this course, I can play a small role in helping the credit union movement be successful going forward. So I appreciate your time today, and just excited to be part of this movement.
Yeah. So, guys, look in the show notes. I've got a link to the GiANT Leadership Voices. I've got a link to Emotional Intelligence, Emerging Leaders, and Target Leadership. All of these, we talk about the GiANT Leadership Voices. In Emotional Intelligence, we talk about how everyone can use the GiANT Voices to learn how to communicate, learn about yourself and what you get excited about or what sets you off, because there might be things that irk you that you can't put words to. This class helps with that. The second one, Emerging Leaders, we bring in the 5 GiANT Leadership Voices to talk about your brand as a leader. How are you going to lead? Because every leader is a little bit different, and understanding what level of each voice you have will help you develop operating principles so you can lead with confidence and in a way that people trust you and want to follow you. And then the target leadership one that goes the most in depth with it, Peter, what you were talking about is learning how to build that bridge. You're leading change. How do you get everyone to be a part of the change and understand why this is important and navigate strategically on this? So guys, thank you so much. This is the Credit Union Leadership Podcast, where we inspire current and aspiring leaders. Thanks for having us. Peter, thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me.
Interested in submitting a question to the Credit Union Leadership Podcast, we want to hear from you. Go in our show notes. We have a link over there, and in that link, it's going to take you to 2 options. You can submit a question written out through email, or you can submit an audio recording through SpeakPipe. We make it super easy. Go to the link in the show notes, click audio recording. Once you click audio recording, it's going to take you straight to a website where you just press the record button. You've got 90 seconds to submit a question or submit you catching doing somebody do it right. And then you just type in your name and email address, and that's it. It comes straight to us, and we'll take it from there. So you don't need to download anything. You don't need to get any new software. You just go to this website, press record, and click submit, and we're good to go. So go to the link in the show notes, click if you want to submit a question written out or through audio, and we'll take it from there. Thank you, guys. We'll see you next time. Are you ready to unlock the secrets to personal and professional success? ServiStar, we proudly present a specialized 4-hour course on emotional intelligence, custom tailored for the credit union industry. Come and embrace a transformative experience in our dynamic and interactive program. And when I say interactive, I mean interactive. This is a workshop. We're going to be discussing things, talking about concepts, bringing in the science of this, but then you're actually going to do work. Practical work. Some of this work, it makes sense. You're like, I can see how I could do this every day. Some of this work's very intense, and people go, wow, this is very elaborate. And it's meant to get you in the headspace to start thinking in lines of how leaders and how our member-facing employees should be thinking when interacting with teammates and external members. We're going to talk about the core aspects of emotional intelligence and unveil its profound influence on the workplace performance, member relations, and just your overall well-being. So sign up for this class. Gain the essential skills to navigate both work and life with ease and grace. We've got the link in the show notes. Excited to see you there.